The following podcast is recorded and produced by Emerge, a media creators co-op.
Welcome to the Defion Productions podcast. I'm your host, the hardest working nobody in Bitcoin, Don. This is episode 113. And today we're going to talk about JP Morgan Chase versus Bitcoin. Unless you've been living under a rock, if you're watching this podcast and you are a Bitcoiner, you probably know what I'm going to be talking about. You probably know some of the story. I don't have all the answers to the story. I have my thoughts that I'm going to share today. I have a great article that went viral this weekend from a Bitcoin Army member, a community that I'm a member of, Marilyn Hoddle. He wrote an article that I'm gonna read a lot of today because it kind of sets the stage for this conversation on JP Morgan Chase and what they're doing behind the scenes to reinvigorate Choke Point 2.0 and the massive short that they have with MicroStrategy, which is definitely playing a role in MicroStrategy's price being suppressed, which is suppressing Bitcoin's price, which is suppressing the ecosystem. So we're going to talk about all that. As we always do, we'll start with the Bitcoin price. As it's been doing for the last month, in the last 7 days, we're down about 3.5%. As you can see, sitting currently at 88,526. The good news is we're up a little bit. We did bottom out a couple of days ago, and what I believe to be around 80,000, 80.7 is what I saw, depending on what exchange. The price got about that low. The total market cap of crypto is a little bit above 3 trillion, which is a good thing to see. Currently 3.04 trillion. Fear and greed index is low, as it should be. It's at 12. Extreme fear in the markets. Looking at the lesser altcoins, you can see that Ethereum is down below 3K. XRP, which was down below $2, is back above at 223. Solana, a little bit below 140. And as you go down, you can kind of see these prices. Some of these coins, Bitcoin Cash is up 13%. Zcash, which has been zigzagging around, which has been wild to watch. The privacy coin that's hitting that privacy narrative. It's down 13.2% in the last 7 days, but I know a couple of days ago it was back over 7. It's just been going between 500 and 700 every couple of days, which has been kind of wild to see. That's kind of the narrative right now. But currently right now it's down, I guess with Bitcoin bouncing. Some of the inflows from Zcash maybe went back to BTC, but we are sitting here currently at 88,486. And we can take a look at here. This is a big story across Bitcoin Twitter. I actually joined this. I forgot that I had a Chase credit card. Canceled it earlier this morning. No longer have a Chase credit card. Thousands of people, which obviously in the grand scheme of things, it isn't a lot. It's not going to shut JP Morgan Chase down, but we are using our voices. Thousands of people are closing their JP Morgan Chase accounts following a premeditated attack on Bitcoin and MicroStrategy shareholders. And yesterday on X, boycott, hashtag boycott JP Morgan was actually trending. So a lot of people were at least hashtagging it. People like myself were canceling their accounts. And we're going to talk about the article that was kind of making waves yesterday on X, again, by Marilyn Hoddle. If you're not following Marilyn Hoddle on X, you should be. He's a Bitcoin Army member. He posts a lot of great content, this being one of his best, in my opinion. And he kind of talks about his views on MicroStrategy as well as JP Morgan Chase. And I'm going to read some of the article. So bear with me as I go through it. The article will be linked in this podcast later on, so you can take a look at it at your own leisure as well. Over the past few months, a pattern has emerged across politics, markets, and media. Scattered headlines subtly connect, market anomalies look less accidental, and institutional actors are behaving with unusual aggression. Something deeper is happening beneath the surface. This is not a normal monetary cycle. This is not traditional partisanship. This is not market volatility. What we are witnessing is a direct confrontation between two competing monetary regimes. The old order, centered around JP Morgan, Wall Street, and the Federal Reserve, and the new order centered around treasury, stablecoins, and a Bitcoin-anchored digital architecture. This conflict is not theoretical anymore. It is live. It is accelerating, and for the first time in decades, spilling into public view. The following is an attempt to map the real battlefield. The most analysts can't see because they are still applying 1970 through 2010 framework to a world breaking out of its own restraints. Side note, I've said many times before, I was actually even saying it prior to this podcast going live, the prior markets before the great financial crisis no longer exists. It's been 17 years since the great financial crisis, and many people look at their 401ks, look at investing the same way they did prior to GFC, and things have completely changed since then. And unfortunately, many people don't see that. Back to the article. JP Morgan steps out of its shadows. Most people think of JP Morgan as a bank. That is a mistake. JP Morgan is the operational arm of the global financial establishment, the entity that sits closest to the Federal Reserve's core mechanisms, influences dollar settlement worldwide, and acts as the primary enforcer of the legacy monetary architecture. So when Trump posted about Epstein's network and explicitly named JP Morgan instead of isolating individuals, it wasn't rhetorical flourish. He pulled the system's most embedded institution into the narrative. Trump's tweet. Now that the Democrats are using the Epstein hoax involving Democrats, not Republicans, to try and deflect from their disastrous shutdown and all of their other failures, I will be asking AG Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice, together with our great patriots at the FBI, to investigate Jeffrey Epstein's involvement and relationships with Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, JP Morgan Chase, and many other people and institutions to determine what was going on with them and him. This is another Russia scam. And all arrows pointing to the Democrats. Records show that these men and many others spent large portions of their life with Epstein and on his island. Stay tuned. When I reposted this article this weekend, I reposted specifically stating anybody that's ever watched a documentary or anybody that's ever watched a movie that's been associated with the great financial crisis, you'll see that JP Morgan Chase and Jamie Dimon specifically is a heavy player in any of those movies and any of those documentaries. JP Morgan Chase was responsible for assisting bailing out many of the banks that didn't fail. The too big to fail moniker was birthed with JP Morgan Chase. Back to the article. Meanwhile, JPM is a primary facilitator in aggressive short pressure on strategy, microstrategy, precisely at a moment when Bitcoin's macro narrative threatens legacy monetary interests. Clients, this is important, clients trying to transfer their MicroStrategy shares out of JPM report delivery delays, hinting at custody stress, the kind that appears only when internal plumbing is under stress. And he linked an article here where you can click on and read about it. JP Morgan sits at the strategic heart of the Fed ecosystem, both structurally and politically. Undermining its position is equivalent to undermining the old monetary regime itself. None of this is normal. All of this is part of the same story. The administration's silent pivot returned monetary power to Treasury. While media fixates on culture war distractions, the real strategic agenda is monetary. The administration is quietly working to pull the center of monetary issuance back to the U.S. Treasury, using Treasury integrated stablecoins, programmable settlement rails, Bitcoin reserves as long duration collateral. This shift doesn't tweak the existing system. It replaces the system's core power center. Right now, the Fed and commercial banks, led by JP Morgan Chase, intermediate virtually every dollar creation and distribution. If Treasury plus stablecoins becomes the issuance and settlement backbone, the banking system loses authority, loses profits, and loses control. JP Morgan understands this. They understand exactly what stablecoins represent. They understand what happens if Treasury becomes the issuer of programmable dollars. So they fight, not with press releases, but with market tactics. Derivatives pressure, liquidity choke points, narrative suppression, custodial delays, and political influence. This isn't a policy dispute. It's an existential struggle. Side note, what I've been saying for weeks, and if you look at all the metrics and all the charts and everything, liquidity has dried up. That's been a huge reason why you've seen not only crypto and Bitcoin dropping, but stocks have been dropping up until the last 2 sessions. For about a whole week straight, stocks were getting pummeled. You saw equities down about 5% last week because there's no liquidity in the markets. And some of this is because of what JP Morgan Chase is doing. Part 3, Bitcoin, the unintended battleground. Bitcoin is not the target, it is the terrain. The administration wants quiet strategic accumulation before making any explicit move toward a treasury-anchored digital system. A premature announcement would ignite a gamma squeeze, send Bitcoin to escape velocity, and make accumulation prohibitively expensive. The problem? The old system is using gold-style suppression mechanisms to crush the Bitcoin signal. Paper derivatives flooding, massive synthetic shortening, perception warfare, liquidity raids at key technical levels, custodial bottlenecks at major prime brokers. JP Morgan has spent decades mastering these techniques on gold. Now they're applying them to Bitcoin. Not because Bitcoin threatens banking profits directly, but because Bitcoin strengthens Treasury's future monetary architecture and weakens the Fed. The administration faces a brutal strategic choice. Let JP Morgan continue suppressing Bitcoin, preserving the ability to accumulate at low prices, or number 2, make a strategic announcement triggering a Bitcoin breakout but losing stealth positioning before political alignment is secured. This is why the administration remains publicly quiet on Bitcoin, not because they don't understand it, but because they understand it too well. Let's take a step back real quick, because I've been on this podcast for the past couple of months very critical of the Trump administration, even to the point that saying that the Trump administration was part of the reason why the price was being suppressed. Marilyn Hoddle is taking a stance that the administration understands Bitcoin. And I would say, and I've said this before, I think Eric Trump and Don Jr., they've been very vocal that they understand Bitcoin, and they've talked about being debanked. And I'm assuming JP Morgan might be one of the players that's debanked them. So they've said things that make you think that the Trump family understands Bitcoin, or should understand Bitcoin. And it's like, what the hell is going on? Why are we waiting so long to make these moves? And we've had this stagnation all year long. And Trump's probably done more to harm in some of the things he's done than help. And I think it's fair if you say he's not harming it. He's at least net neutral, and he hasn't been doing much to assist. And Marilyn Hoddle's taking the stance that the government behind the scenes is taking this opportunity to accumulate Bitcoin at a lower level while letting JP Morgan do this price suppression that appears to be happening behind the scenes. Part 4, both sides are fighting on a fragile foundation. This entire struggle is occurring atop a monetary regime built over 6 decades of financialization, structural leverage, artificially low rates, asset-first growth, reserve concentration, and institutional cartelization. Historical correlations are breaking everywhere because the system is no longer coherent. TradFi pundits who treat this like a normal cycle failed to grasp the cycle itself is dissolving. The regime is fracturing. The plumbing is unstable. The incentives are diverging. In both factions, JP Morgan's legacy order and Treasury's emergent order are fighting on the same brittle infrastructure. One miscalculation risks cascading instability. This is why the moves appear so strange, so disjointed, and so fragile. MicroStrategy, the conversion bridge under direct assault. Now we introduce a critical layer that most commentators miss. MicroStrategy is just not another corporate Bitcoin holder. It's become the conversion mechanism, the bridge between legacy institutional capital and the emergent Bitcoin treasury monetary architecture. MicroStrategy's structure, its leveraged Bitcoin strategy, and its preferred equity product effectively convert fiat, credit, and treasury assets into long-duration Bitcoin exposure. In doing so, MicroStrategy has become a de facto on-ramp for institutions and retail who cannot or will not hold spot Bitcoin directly, but need relief from artificially suppressed yields from YCC, which means if the administration envisions a future where treasury-backed digital dollars and Bitcoin reserves coexist, MSTR is a crucial corporate conduit towards that transition, and JP Morgan knows that. So when JP Morgan facilitates heavy shorting, introduces delivery delays, pressures MSTR liquidity and fuels negative market narratives, it's not simply attacking Michael Saylor. It's attacking the conversion bridge that makes the administration's long-term accumulation strategy viable. There's even a plausible scenario, one still very speculative but increasingly logical, where the U.S. government eventually steps in and takes a strategic investment in MSTR. Let's take a step back for a second. Although that's very speculative, it's not out of the question. As recently as last week, the administration has taken its third position in a publicly traded company. They took a stake in Intel, and I forget the second one, but Westinghouse. They just took a 10% stake in Westinghouse last week. So they've taken an equity stake in 3 publicly traded companies so far. I know 10% in Intel, and I believe it's 10% in Westinghouse as well. So the government taking a position, an equity stake in MicroStrategy, would not be at this point out of the question since they've already done it 3 times. Receiving MSTR ownership in return for injections of U.S. treasuries, which would explicitly support MicroStrategy's preferred vehicles and support higher credit ratings. MicroStrategy currently has a triple B- credit rating, which is just astronomically ridiculous. Such a move would carry risk, politically and financially, but it would also send a signal that the world could not ignore. The United States is defending a critical node in its emerging monetary architecture, and that possibility also explains the intensity of JP Morgan's attacks. So we'll go through this. I'm not going to read it all the way through because we'll be here all day reading. It's very long. It's very good, but we'll read his comments here because this kind of gets to the gist of this. The article was completed using Original Thought, Chat Enhanced, or OTCE. He's not a professional writer, doesn't aspire to become one. His goal is to present both familiar and novel ideas with a twist, making them easy for readers to digest and understand whenever possible. He will provide credit to the original sources and ideas. The questions and concepts explored here reflect both his personal thoughts about what the future might hold for his family. None of the articles should be considered financial advice. Instead, he encourages you to engage actively with the content. And then he gives his copyright into his preferred LLM and yada, yada, yada. Great article. I would, again, Marilyn Hoddle on X. You can go into depth into that article here. If you take a look at it right here, there's his, it's pinned to his X account. Let's talk about JP Morgan Chase specifically, because there's some important information that I don't think the average viewer or the average citizen understands or knows about JP Morgan Chase. That's public knowledge. I'm going to show you an article. If you take a look, it's from November 9th of 2023. So we're over 2 years old. A lot of noise was made last week in regards to the Epstein emails being released and Epstein funding some early Bitcoin core development. As early as 2014 and 2015, it made the rounds. It coincided with Bitcoin's price dropping. A lot of people were saying, Epstein had a tie with Bitcoin, yada, yada, yada. No bigger tie in a financial environment has been made than with JP Morgan Chase. They've settled multiple settlements with multiple different entities, most notably Jeffrey Epstein accusers. And the last one was settled in 2023 to the tune of $290 million. A U.S. court on Thursday, and again, this is 2 years ago, approved JP Morgan Chase's $200 million settlement with women who said Jeffrey Epstein abused them and that the largest U.S. bank turned a blind eye to the late financier's sex trafficking. U.S. District Judge Jed Rakoff called the deal a really excellent settlement and that he could prevent future sex trafficking by alerting banks to the consequences of facilitating transactions linked to it. The case sent a message to this very substantial settlement that banking institutions have responsibilities that perhaps were not fully recognized in the past. The deal followed embarrassing disclosures that JP Morgan ignored internal warnings and overlooked red flags about Epstein because he had been a valuable client. Marinate on that for a second. Overlooked red flags. Red flags such as he was a sex offender since the early 2000s. And they continued to bank with him. Epstein was a JP Morgan client. This is very important. J.P. Morgan Chase client from 1998 to 2013. The bank kept him on even after he was arrested in 2006 on prostitution charges and pled guilty 2 years later, and was a registered sex offender as of 2008. They kept banking with him another 5 years. Not banking with him, like letting him have a checking account to like get his check direct deposited. No, we're talking about like multiple tens, if not hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars flowing through J.P. Morgan to, I mean, if you say the most popular pedophile sex offender on the planet, you probably would say Jeffrey Epstein, right? When you think pedophile, you think Epstein Island, right?
Sure.
Epstein Island, Jeffrey Epstein, J.P. Morgan Chase was letting him bank there 5 years after he was a convicted pedophile sex offender. Let that marinate for a second. J.P. Morgan did not admit any wrongdoing agreeing to the settlement. So in J.P. Morgan's eyes, again, you can admit wrongdoing when you settle. They said they did nothing wrong. So according to piece of shit Jamie Dimon and bigger piece of shit J.P. Morgan Chase as an entity and organization, they don't think they did anything wrong. They think that flooding the monies of big pedophile Jeffrey Epstein was fine. No problems. This was a fair and just outcome for the nearly 200 survivors who bravely came forward, a J.P. Morgan spokesman said after the hearing. Rakoff countered that the states had not yet brought any claims and noted that the U.S. Virgin Islands, which also sued J.P. Morgan in 2022, had reached a smaller $75 million settlement with the bank in September of 2022. So they paid $75 million in 2022. They paid $290 million in 2023. And if you're not sure of why the U.S. Virgin Islands is so important, it's because that's where Epstein Island is located. $75 million. That one covered 100 women. The 290 covered 200 women. The 75 million covered 100 women. That's J.P. Morgan Chase. That is who is currently at war with Bitcoin. Another article here. Federal prosecutors expanded their probe into Jeffrey Epstein's sex crimes in 2007 to include potential charges of money laundering. So let's take another step back. Not only is Jeffrey Epstein a pedophile piece of shit and convicted of sex trafficking and sex crimes, he was convicted of money laundering. Rich, I don't know about you, but I think if I was convicted of money laundering, that Bank of America, who I currently bank with, would say, we're not taking your business anymore because you're money laundering. I don't know what you think about that.
It's like if you watch, like if you go home tonight and you Google political thrillers and you watch some movies and like there's a guy, you know, like he's walking like along a beach and then he gets shot and his dog like looks his face. Like, you know, you've seen these movies, right? Like all these movies, like it's like J.P. Morgan. Like there's so many things where they were so powerful and they just could do whatever they wanted and probably knew what he was doing. And again, what they paid in settlements is nothing to them. It's nothing to their profit margin. So like they were going to continue because he was so connected and he had so much influence. And we're going to find out hopefully someday, like it might take another 10 years. They keep saying we're going to hear things, but I don't know how much we're going to actually ever really hear. And it's going to be proven because there's so many people. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, progressive. They knew, Epstein knew how to get to people. And I think he got to a lot of people. And I think that's ultimately why maybe some people in J.P. Morgan. And that's why they just kept doing business with him.
So part of the Epstein emails that came out last week, there's a snippet in it. And the Epstein in the emails grew furious when he learned that prosecutors had broadened their investigation scope. Emails show. His high-powered team of lawyers included Gerald LaCourte, Harvard Law School professor, Alan Dershowitz, former Bush administration official Jay Lefowitz, and former independent counsel Kenneth Starr. Kenneth Starr, you remember that name? He was involved. Argued that Villanova was pursuing baseless claims to pressure their client into a plea deal. They launched an aggressive campaign to discredit her attempts to follow the money and pressured higher-ups to remove her and others from the case or scuttle the case entirely. Ultimately, efforts to prosecute Epstein for sex crimes and financial crimes ended after senior officials in the U.S. Attorney's Office directed prosecutors to begin plea negotiations with Epstein. So he was never convicted. He pled out. That's very important.
Right.
He never went to trial. We never got, that's a big reason why all this shit happened with him hanging himself.
And a lot of this because nobody wanted to be embarrassed or exposed that they knew what was going on and or were there, that were involved with this. And that's, and again, if you look at all these names that are in this, that are connected, they're all over the place. They're in every circle. That's why it's like, there's so many weird conspiracy theories about even how he made his money is so suspect. Like, it's so weird how he acquired this much money. Supposedly having one client, I forget the guy's name, like he had just a couple clients. Like it's just too weird. It's like we're never gonna know, but there's clearly a bigger thing here that was going on, and it's just like one of those, like I said, it's like one of those political thriller movies that we've watched for years on TV. It's crazy.
So ultimately, Epstein pled guilty to 2 state-level sex charges, an outcome that's been widely derided as far too lenient. More than a decade would pass before Epstein's finances would come under scrutiny again. And Villanova, who left the federal prosecutor's office in 2023, declined to comment for the story. Super surprising there. And here goes this is where we stand as a Bitcoin community, because Jamie Dimon's been taking shots at Bitcoin for a while. So this is nothing new. And this 100% strategy, this is in the irresponsibly long MSTR. I found this in that community, and I thought this was pretty good. It's not that long, so I'm going to read it. It's kind of a synopsis of Jamie Dimon's attacks on Bitcoin. JP Morgan is our enemy against strategy in Bitcoin. Look at what Jamie Dimon has said about Bitcoin. You cannot hate JP Morgan enough. In 2017, he called Bitcoin a fraud, worse than tulip bulbs, predicted it would blow up and be closed down in 10 years, and stated he'd fire in a second any JP Morgan employee caught trading it, calling buyers stupid. In 2021, described Bitcoin as worthless during the Institute of International Finance annual membership meeting. In 2023, labeled Bitcoin a hyped-up fraud and compared it to a pet rock at the World Economic Forum while testifying before Congress that it is only used for criminals, drug traffickers, money laundering, tax avoidance, and sex trafficking, adding, if I was the governor, I'd close it down. Kind of like JP Morgan with sex offenders and pedophiles. Kind of sounds like what JP Morgan does, ironically enough. 2024 reiterated that Bitcoin does nothing and is a useless pet rock at the World Economic Forum in Davos, while warning buyers that they're at risk of using it to use in illegal activities like money laundering, fraud, tax avoidance, and sex trafficking. There we go, it's sex trafficking again. This guy is absolutely obsessed with sex trafficking, and I know why. Because he literally funds sex traffickers. So that's why he likes to talk about, it's like, was a Freudian slip, they call that shit? Like, this guy keeps talking about sex trafficking. This guy is the CEO of the biggest bank who literally runs the plumbing and infrastructure of our financial system, who is the biggest reason why Jeffrey Epstein was able to operate for so long. He was using Jamie Dimon's bank to facilitate all of his illegal activities, most notably sex trafficking and pedophilia. But Bitcoin is the sex trafficking problem. Makes sense. 2025 January.
You always point. You look at what he's doing. It's trying to push the attention away from themselves. Which it's funny, like the amount of people that have been arrested in the last year or two that are, they're the leader of this, or they were this, or they were that, and then they're always the ones yelling and screaming on X about this and that, and then you find out that that's what they got arrested for the thing they're always saying everybody else did, and it just got okay, like it and almost like you're not surprised, like it's almost like That's why I'm not surprised
like
they're
like the gay bashing Republican congressman who get caught in like the
yeah, like
restrooms of a
right. Like it's just it's just. Well, what a surprise! Or
Yeah.
and unfortunately, and that doesn't mean everybody's corrupt, but unfortunately, like these people that seem to be these warriors that go out and do this stuff, it always seems that we find out that they were these people. They've been yelling about all these weird things that this party was doing or that party was doing. It turns out they've been doing it all along. And there's no doubt in our mind that that if we ever do get the files, that there will be some powerful people within J.P. Morgan that not only knew what were going on, there's no doubt in my mind. I'm not going to accuse somebody, but we're going to find out that some of these people were on that island at different periods of time. Like, just no doubt in my mind. Whether they did anything or not, they were there, they witnessed it, they knew what was going on, and because of wealth or influence or fear, they did nothing. Which is why they're trying to distract by blaming Bitcoin for all of this and everything else that they can.
It doesn't stop. Back in 2020 or in January 2025, called crypto decentralized Ponzi scheme with Bitcoin having no intrinsic value, heavily used again by sex traffickers. Back with the sex trafficking, money launderers, and ransomware hackers. In April of 2025, stated there's no hope for Bitcoin as a currency, calling it a public decentralized Ponzi scheme. The next month in May, he wasn't done. He had more shit to talk. He reiterated he's not a fan of Bitcoin due to its association with sex trafficking. Again, 3 times in 1 year. And terrorism. He's added terrorism now.
Oh, okay.
Despite allowing JP Morgan clients to buy. Do you hear that? You hear that part?
Yeah.
Despite allowing now, that's when he started to allow his clients to get exposure to it.
And I also heard that Bitcoiners beat up puppies. Like,
Yeah.
Like you're just all bad guys.
We drop kick them off bridges. November 2025 claimed Bitcoin is worthless and a scam on 60 Minutes while JP Morgan ramps up their Bitcoin exposure. And there he is. Take a look. There's the guy that's obsessed with sex trafficking. At least public knowledge, because it's a public case that everybody can look at. They support sex trafficking as an operation because they did for 5 years. Actually for longer, but for 5 years when he was actually identified as a sex trafficker. So there's that. Good stuff. Small short video here I'm going to play. It's 42 seconds long. Let's make sure that the volume is up. JP Morgan's manipulation tactics.
Fire any one of his traders buying Bitcoin. Bitcoin drops 24%. When Jamie Dimon speaks, people listen. So that weekend, we found out that the largest buyer of a Bitcoin fund that's in Europe that buys physical Bitcoin, right? The largest buyer was Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan. And that's not illegal.
He says it's a fraud.
It says you fire anyone that buys it.
Fire.
Yes.
And at the same time, his company is buying it.
His company is buying it.
It's just, so unethical.
So that's Glenn Beck, who's talking to this gentleman, and that's basically, it wasn't in the other article that we were talking about, but you can see it. It's super unethical, but it's not illegal. During those times where Jamie Dimon was telling everybody about how bad Bitcoin is, reminding you that like sex trafficking and Bitcoin are like brother and sister, while he was talking about all that and telling you how it's a pet rock and it's worthless, it's going to zero, he was telling the public that while stacking it behind the scenes. And there's nothing illegal about it. Extremely unethical. Not illegal. That's Jamie Dimon. Teddy Bitcoins tweeted this last night. JP Morgan has a history of illegally naked shorting, but you think they aren't doing it against MSTR and Sailor. If MicroStrategy, and I don't know if this is true, I'm seeing this trend, so I'm going to say this without knowing any, I feel like it's not true because JP Morgan is so big, I can't see JP Morgan blowing up. They're the plumbing of the entire financial system, but a lot of people have been sharing this, so I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know if this is the truth or not. If MicroStrategy goes above 280 this week, then JP Morgan blows up based on how big they're. I just don't think that that's true, but again, I don't know. But it's just making the emphasis of how big the short that MSTR is for JP Morgan currently.
It's never going to be JP Morgan. What it will be is it'll be somebody will take the fall. That like it's think of like Hollywood and what happened with like Harvey Weinstein. Like it was suddenly it came out and everybody was shocked, even though everybody talked about it for years. I have friends that lived in Hollywood, that worked in Hollywood, and had heard stories about Harvey being Harvey, and people's careers that were ruined because they dare try to report it, and then finally it got out there so much. And other people, it started the domino started to fall. But like his corporation, it still exists, and I think they changed their name and stuff, but they're still there. Like eventually they said, "Oh my God, we can't believe that he was doing this for all these years." Like I'm shocked. It's the line from Casablanca. I'm shocked to find out there's gambling going on in this establishment. Like and here's your winnings. That's what I think that will happen. It'll be. They'll target 3 or 4 people and they'll have to retire, and they were going to retire anyway, and they'll still get their balloon retirement package and all that stuff. And then we're going to have a lot of meetings, and we're going to really think about and go to confession and have some serious talks about. So this never happens again. And then they'll just and then we'll move on and we'll think about something else.
So
Too big to fail.
Yeah, agree. This article here is just more about this developing story with JP Morgan and MSTR. November 20th, JP Morgan warns MSCI decision could force strategy out of top equity indexes. The bank said billions in passive flows could unwind if MSCI removes strategy from major equity benchmarks, heightening pressure on the Bitcoin leveled firm. What to know? JP Morgan said Strategy's recent sell-off reflects mounting fears of index exclusions rather than Bitcoin weakness. MSCI's January 15th decision could trigger billions in passive outflows as major benchmarks reassess digital asset-heavy balance sheets. The bank warned that index exclusion would hit the firm's valuation liquidity and Strategy's ability to raise capital. So what's happening here is Strategies in the NASDAQ 100 right now. It's considered to be in the indices here, and they're almost in, and they're trying to get into the S&P 500. And what, ironically, JP Morgan comes out and says is that there's a decision that's going to come out on January 15th that could stop companies that have more than 50% of their assets in digital assets from being in indexes at all, which would obviously be terrible for MicroStrategy and would cause massive outflows of people owning that stock, which if you're a company that has a large short against that, you would be out there spreading the news that this shit's going to happen, and also at the same time spreading that news because you are such a big player. You could literally be pressuring the MSCI to do that. You would be heavily incentivized to do that. If you have this large short, you could be pressuring behind the scenes that to play out exactly as such, and you just print on that type of short. Again, that seems illegal. I don't think that's legal. I don't think you can literally be betting one way and then paying or influencing in some sort of way your bet to come true. That shit is illegal. So this came out. Today's the 24th, 4 days ago. This is the catalyst for everything that we're seeing because JP Morgan was the one to break that news. And now all the internet sleuths are out there looking at all this stuff, bringing up shit in the past about the Epstein. The Epstein emails came out a couple days after that. This was kind of the shitstorm that kind of started everything, where JP Morgan has basically declared war against MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy is an adjacent Bitcoin product, and Bitcoiners came out of the hornet's nest. And this is kind of, where we are with all this. The biggest that I've seen so far, Grant Cardone tweeted this over the weekend. He pulled $20 million from Chase, and he's going to sue them for credit card malfeasance. And early this morning, that spaces that I was talking about that happened, the Bitcoin Today spaces, great spaces to listen to it every single day. It went for about 6.5 hours today, which is far more than normal. But it was really good, and it talked a lot about what we're talking about here on this podcast. I made a video, and I posted it in their nest, and I'm going to play it at the end of this podcast. I think we're going to have some time for me to do that. But Grant Cardone spoke in that Spaces today and said that he transferred his money from Chase to Wells Fargo, completely pulled his banking from J.P. Morgan Chase. Again, J.P. Morgan Chase is a multi-100 billion trillion, and like 20 million is in the grand scheme of things not a big deal, but it can't be good PR for them.
It's a terrible PR, and when it comes down to it, like there are corporations that aren't as big that have been severely affected by decisions that they've made, whether it's Disney, Target, whoever you want to talk, Starbucks. Like there's a lot of companies that have really like Walgreens. A lot of people are mad at Walgreens because Walgreens just, did something where they're canceling, like vacations for their employees and all that type of stuff because they can't do it. But even though the CEO got a big raise, it's people are, and you can see what's going to happen with those things is people are like, well, I'm not going to go to that drugstore anymore. I'll just buy from here. I'll go from there. I'll go to. So there is impact. Like and people, if enough people like him and other large corporations say, you know what, like I just don't want to be connected with this anymore. There are other places I can do my banking, and then eventually maybe some people the board will recognize they've got to do something. They've got to do something because their public image is in the toilet and they'll have to do something. Maybe they'll throw somebody under the bus, but I don't know. Like, it's a shame. It really is ridiculous. And if you and I did anything remotely close to this, kind of crap, we'd be arrested,
So Jack Mallers, who is the founder and CEO of Strike, and he's also the founder and CEO of a Bitcoin treasury company. So he does massive volume, both through his company and as an individual, I'm sure. He posted a screenshot, and he framed it, the letter he received from J.P. Morgan Chase closing his bank account. And if we take a look inside there, it said suspicious banking activities. So the suspicious banking activities that he's doing, that J.P. Morgan Chase was saying, was he was running a Bitcoin company, and he was onboarding and holding Bitcoin as a treasury company. And J.P. Morgan Chase in September, this is September, so he's just like this happened a couple months ago, and he didn't really speak much of it. He talks shit about banks all the time, but now that this thing is kind of taken a life of its own, it was trending over the weekend, he shared this screenshot that, in September, 2 months ago, he was debanked by J.P. Morgan Chase as well. And Jack Mallers is very well known, one of the most well-known people probably in our space currently, speaks at all the Bitcoin conferences. Like I said, he's started Strike, and he's got a Bitcoin treasury company that's trying to rival. It's not going to get the Strategy because Strategy had a huge head start, but it's like modeling itself after what Strategy's doing. And he was debanked by J.P. Morgan Chase, the same pedophile supporting Jamie Dimon. It's kind of where we're at. It's wild.
Chase is smart. I mean, they've linked themselves with so many corporations, whether it's Southwest, whether it's Amazon, and that's why most people have Chase credit cards, because you get these credit cards that are your Amazon credit card. You get the points on Amazon. You get your points on Southwest. You get your points on Disney. And a lot of them were paired with Chase. So a lot of people, if they're paying attention to this and they're offended by these actions, maybe they'll cancel the credit cards. And again, it's not like it's going to shut them down, but it does make them at some point. It is a public relations nightmare. And the interesting thing with this is that the fact that Trump mentioned them and his own desire to cause distractions. Let's put it that way. So he's going to protect himself. So if he feels that like he's got a big target, like some of the people he mentioned in that tweet, as well as J.P. Morgan, he is a pretty powerful guy. So you don't know. Like, I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, for sure. We'll end this a little bit early today. I do want to get to this video. I'll tee it up real quick before I show it. As I was saying already, there was a Spaces. If you don't know what a Spaces is, get on X. If you're into Bitcoin, X is the best spot to be, in my opinion. to get your information, to listen to people that are prominent voices in this space on a daily basis, and even have the opportunity to jump on a stage and interact with them. It's just phenomenal. It's a phenomenal opportunity. But there was a Spaces today, like I said, that went for about 6.5 hours. Simon Dixon was on the Spaces. Darkside ran it. Terrence Michael, who I've shared his stuff in previous podcasts here. Marilyn Hoddle, who wrote the article that went viral this weekend, was on that stage. I got sent a request to be on the stage to speak, but I was at work and I knew that the direction things were going, and I didn't have the time to commit to wait on the stage to speak. And then I knew what I wanted to say if I was going to be on stage was going to be passionate, and it could lead into a bunch of different directions, and I didn't want to just cut out on it. So I went out to my car and I filmed a video that I posted in the Nest for people to kind of see, and just my thoughts on everything in regards to the situation with JP Morgan Chase that went over the weekend. That's been the talk of Bitcoin. So I'm going to show this video here. I'll end the podcast on this video because I end the video the way I end every podcast, so it'll be appropriate. But this is my thoughts. It goes in a couple different directions, but it kind of encompasses what I was thinking to give you a little bit of the feel what that conversation was about based on what I said. It's on my X. If you go to my X, again, I always forget to do this. I'm so terrible at self-promotion. I just want to get to podcasting because I just love doing this shit. But if you're not following me on X, go to X at Renali_Don. Defion Productions on YouTube and Facebook. This is where we're live simultaneously every single Monday at 6:30. Follow, like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. Let's jump into this video here. Here's my thoughts. It's 5 minutes and 32 seconds. We will end the podcast on this video. So when it's done, we will cut out the live stream. So thanks for watching if you are watching it live. If you're watching it on playback, please like, get us in the algorithm, all that stuff. Here we go. So I'm sitting in my car. I'm on lunch break. I only got about 10 or 15 minutes left. I'd love to jump on the stage and try to speak, but I don't want to take up anybody else's time, and I don't want to get on a rant and then be late going back in. But I just felt like I wanted to say something more than just posting a comment. The speakers on the stage today are dynamite, as usual. Dark, Bruce, Dave, Infra, Marilyn Hoddle with the amazing research and paper that he wrote this weekend that went viral as it should have. Simon was on earlier before I took one of my patients in, and I was listening earlier. Like I said, I'm in the parking lot of my job. I'm a counselor. I've been doing social work for 20 years. My yearly salary is less than what one Bitcoin is worth at the present moment. For a little insight into that, I've been in Bitcoin since December of 2013, really started to really get in 2014. So because of that, it depends. It's all in perspective, a decent amount of Bitcoin, I guess you could say. And because I'm a nobody, I am, that's my moniker. I'm a nobody. I'm not nearly as smart as any of the guys that are speaking on the stage and the top minds in this space. I would love to have 25% of the knowledge and understanding of everything that they do. But what I do have is I understand what it is to be a nobody. I understand what it is to be some regular person in society working a regular job and just being asleep in the matrix like everybody else is. If it wasn't for Bitcoin, I don't even know. I don't know if I'd be alive. And I say that metaphorically and probably literally. I've made mistakes along the way, profit taking, which makes me want to puke when I even say that, shit coining, all the stuff that you go through as a Bitcoiner. And I've done none of that since 2017. I've only just added sats. And like I said, I have a amount of Bitcoin comparative to my salary that I just shouldn't have. And this whole JP Morgan shit that's going on, I've been saying this for a couple of years now on the little podcast that I do. We're at war. People like me that aren't finance people, that aren't on Wall Street, that don't have, the opportunities in the fiat world that others may have. Bitcoin that's our only weapon. It's our only shot. And for somebody like me, I've made peace a while ago now
that the Bitcoin that I have is going to be saving my children. And that's what puts me at peace now. I'm never going to spend my Bitcoin. I'm not going to sell it. I'm not going to get fiat. I'm not going to try to make my life better, buy a car and a house and floss like, other people do with the stuff on social media. I'm just going to keep working my meager job. I'm going to keep operating in the fiat world and keep stacking Bitcoin, knowing that my kids are not going to be prey of people like Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan, and the rest of Wall Street, and all the shit that we've been put through since what I believe, and again, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but since the great financial crisis, which burst this whole thing, the middle class, lower middle class, regular, whatever you want, middle class, like, we have no shot. If you're not stacking Bitcoin and you're in the middle class, lower middle class, you have no shot. It's game, set, match for you. So if you don't own Bitcoin now and you come across this video and you're just listening to this spaces and you're trying to learn, start getting some Bitcoin. We're at war. Whether you're a Bitcoiner or not, whether you like Bitcoin or you hate Bitcoin or you think it's a Ponzi scheme, it doesn't matter. The enemy is the same. JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, and Wall Street are our enemies. And they are putting the foot to our necks, whether you're in Bitcoin or not. They just happen to be coming at Bitcoin because they recognize it's the only shot for people like me. Nobody's. That's our only opportunity. And they're doing whatever they can to try to stop that opportunity from being realized. So if I would have got on stage, I'm looking at my clock, a little under 5 minutes, I probably would have said this. I literally got about 2 minutes before I got to go back in and see my next patient, and I just wanted to, film this video and maybe somebody will see it and it'll resonate because I'm super passionate about this. It's why I do the podcast that I do. I'm not monetized on anything. I don't get paid for nothing. I just do it because I really, honestly, wholeheartedly believe that this world is fucked and the only glimmer of hope is Bitcoin. Full stop. I honestly believe that. Like, people believe in religion and God and all that stuff, and I'm not here to say one way or another, but the way people feel about that stuff is how I feel about Bitcoin saving people. That's it. Don't trust, verify. Peace.